Hi, my name is Matt Braynard. I'm the former Director of Data and Strategy for President Trump's campaign in 1996, and I've been working in this field going all the way back to 1996 when I first started at the Republican National Committee in the Political Analysis Department. I've also worked in this field for the nation's premier election administration and redistricting firm, Election Data Service, for about a decade, and I've worked as an independent consultant on campaigns all across the country, everything from president all the way down to town council, with a tremendous amount of experience in the voter data and election administration field. So I wanted to walk through the process that we're using to potentially identify fraudulent votes, talk about where we currently are in that process, and also sort of address some of the questions that came up on Twitter. So I want to be as transparent as possible, and this is part of that. Please bear with me. I'm quite exhausted. It's been a very busy couple of days. I did not expect to be doing this. I had a family vacation planned in the Dominican Republic that I had to cancel, and thankfully my wife has been incredibly patient with that change. Hopefully we'll get to go later when things settle down, but right now this is where I'm needed. So I'm going to walk through the process. I have a hastily drawn diagram here that I'm going to use to sort of explain what's going on, because I know that there have been just so many questions, and I just absolutely want to be as transparent as possible about what I'm trying to do here and what my team is trying to do. So let's move me up to the corner here. Okay. I want to make clear that I've seen a lot of charts and graphs and maps showing anomalous things, and I've seen a lot of rumors. I don't believe any of that is actually actionable. Actionable meaning two things: something that could lead to a legal remedy, or something that could lead to reforms in how elections are carried out in states across this country. The only things I think that will make a difference are affidavits and death certificates. Affidavits, somebody saying this happened or this didn't happen, contrary to the records that the election systems in the various states have. And death certificates, suggesting that somebody may have voted who in fact is no longer alive. So that's really what we're angling for here. And while maps and theories might lead us to places where we can find affidavits and death certificates, ultimately, those are the only two things that I believe will make a difference. So on this chart, what we've collected from 6 target states are the early voting and absentee requests, the raw files from the states, their own records exported out of their computer systems. We've then had them enhanced by our commercial vendor at great expense to add things that might have been missing, like date of birth, phone numbers, whether or not they're on the NCOA list, which is the National Change of Address database. Anytime you move and you fill out a little card to get your mail forwarded to you, you go into a database that then the Postal Service sells for a lot of money, as well as the Social Security Death Index / master death file to find if there are any matches there. We then break this data set into 2 different groups: those that returned their ballots and those that didn't. I'm going to talk first about those that did not return a ballot. Our plan for these people for whom we have a phone number matched is to reach out to them and ask them 2 questions. Number 1, did you request a ballot? Number 2, did you return a ballot? If they said they didn't request a ballot, that's a red flag. If they said they returned a ballot, but it didn't show up, it didn't get back to the clerk's office, that is also a red flag. And in both of those cases, when our contact team through phone and text identifies somebody who answers either of those 2 questions that way, it goes straight to our affidavit team, because a rumor of somebody saying something or somebody's cousin said something to something, I've heard it all. There's nothing short of an affidavit that is definitive. So we need that level of definitiveness to be able to establish anything. Okay, so let's go to the other branch. Those who returned their absentee ballots or who did in fact vote early in person. We're going to put these into 3 different categories: those who are matched to our deceased list, those who were matched to the National Change of Address list, and those that were otherwise lower in active voters. These are people who perhaps have never voted, or maybe they voted once 10 years ago. They incidentally registered to vote because they did it when they got their driver's license or when they graduated high school or something. Let's talk first about deceased. Just because somebody gets matched doesn't actually mean they're actually dead. So that's why we're going to have our research team go through several additional steps to try to establish whether or not this individual actually had a ballot cast, and this is an individual who is in fact deceased. In many of these cases, if in theory there is a organized ballot fraud operation in any of these states, in all likelihood they're looking for people, for voters on the rolls who have not voted in a while. Among the people who have not voted in a while are those who are dead, who did not get scrubbed from the state list. Some states scrub somewhat vigorously, some don't scrub at all for all kinds of different reasons. But if you were running such an operation, you probably wouldn't be double checking whether or not people were dead or not. You're just casting as many ballots as you possibly can, because who's going to look it up, right? But that would be indicative potentially of a much larger operation, especially if there's any geographical concentration of where these deceased are. The next tranche of data are those who were found to have been in the National Change of Address database. That means they requested a ballot and they returned it, or they showed up in person, and the address that ballot was mailed to is not the address they live at anymore. We're going to do two things with them. First of all, if they are in fact out-of-state NCOA, we're going to get that to our legal team to evaluate whether that vote was cast illegally due to a lack of a residency requirement. That is in fact an illegal vote. If we can establish that, we'll bring attention to it. We're also going to have our research team look at that, because one of the most tried and true ways of detecting illegal ballots is that somebody moved away, they requested an absentee ballot, got it, voted, but also voted in their home state. So we're going to look for cases of double voting by comparing our target states to other states, particularly adjacent states that people are most likely to have moved to. Anybody that we found on our NCOA list that we were able to match a phone number to, our contacts team is going to reach out to them through phone and text to ask them two questions, the same two questions we asked the unreturned, but they were looking for a slightly different answer. We're asking whether or not they requested a ballot. If they said no, that's a big red flag. That means that they didn't request a ballot, yet in their name a ballot was requested, sent, and returned. Or somebody showed up at an early voting location, claimed to be them, and cast the ballot. That immediately gets them over to our affidavit team. We asked whether or not they returned a ballot, because maybe they did request a ballot. But if they didn't return it, and maybe the reason they didn't return it was because they didn't get it in the first place, again, a big red flag, and straight over to the affidavit team. One other group, the low and inactive voters, they were people, again, who've not voted in a long time, and we're going to reach out to them if we have budget and resources, and again, ask them those same questions. Did they request a ballot or not? And if they said no, right over to affidavit team. Maybe this was the one election where they decided to do so, and they did, they got it, but they didn't return it. Again, right over to affidavit team. So this is, and this is not an absolute comprehensive way to determine all potential ballot fraud. We've got some other tactics we're looking at. But this is where our focus is right now. Now, our research team is always looking out for additional anomalies. My mailbox is full of people pointing out, this happened. In some cases where we think that looking at what somebody brings us is it could be productive or fruitful, we're certainly going to take a look. But right now we're kind of constrained by resources, those primarily being financial and manpower. And we're on a very, very tight timeline, which is why I kind of want to get to my next point here, which is my inbox is filled with people who want to help. It seems like every right-leaning person who can write SQL or write code has reached out, and it's greatly appreciated. But for the most part, I regret I can't really take advantage of it. The timeline is too short. I don't know so many of these folks are strangers. We have such limited budget. I don't necessarily have time to go through everybody that's offered so generously or has an idea or something like that and give everyone an individual response. I've really done my best to do that. But if you reached out and you said, hey, I can help with this, and you didn't hear back from me, it's not because of any animosity, because I don't think you've got something to add. It's just that given the timeline, when I need a resource, I've got to reach out to people that I know I can count on, that I know are real, that I know can turn things around. And that's basically how we're building out our team. Tomorrow we'll have, I think, 2 or 3 additional people joining us in our headquarters here. And they'll be building out the research team. We have a potential lawyer coming on. So we're building the team as quickly as possible. But again, there has to be some sort of trust factor. And if I had months to do this, I'd love for everybody who volunteered to do something to, find a way to put them to work. But given the timeline, right now all we really need is cash. So I want to go through the Twitter questions, because I did offer to take questions for people who responded to that tweet. So I'll just try to get through them quickly so this video doesn't go on too long. In many cases, you need tens of thousands of votes to be invalidated. I don't believe that we actually need to demonstrate enough votes were cast fraudulently to overcome a margin of victory. I think historically, at least in terms of legal remedies for this are concerned, substantial evidence of a concerted effort. It doesn't necessarily have to be the number of ballots to overturn an election that we have to identify. We just have to identify a pattern that it's likely to happen. And again, the only way you can really prove a pattern like that is affidavits and death certificates. And that's what we're chasing, and that's very expensive. Let's see, any other questions here? Have we been able to run against SSDI and master death file? Yes, our vendor, in fact, who's running this actually has 5 outside vendors they're running that up against, along with state supply. So we think it's pretty rigorous, and we're doing full match on birth date, full birth date. And that's not enough, because again, our team is going to have to individually go through each one of those records before we actually make the claim, yes, this is a ballot cast by a dead person. What are we doing to collect and analyze the data? Me and my partner here want to slip into the camera. Don't be shy. Yeah, he and I have been working together since 1997. We actually started on the Trump team together in 1996. I've got about 50 years of experience doing this, and we're actually bringing in other people too that have similar, experience in the area as well. Matt, does it make sense to focus on key urban counties first rather than statewide? It certainly does if there's a concentration of NCOA or unreturned ballot activity in those areas. So yeah, we're going to give additional scrutiny to areas where we see geographic concentration, because let's say, there's a lot of quote-unquote dead voters, but they're all in one precinct. That would be a very big red flag. So we certainly have a geographical awareness, and there's several different angles we're looking at this. Do we have the ability to cross-reference ballots only marked at the top of the ticket for Biden with a live voter base? So what we're talking about here, the technical term for that is undervotes, where there are certain races where they're just not marked. I know there's been a lot of evidence provided of where there's tremendous number of votes for Biden, but then a lot of undervotes where people are just not filling out the rest of the ticket. That doesn't actually prove anything. What it does, though, is give us an indication of a geography, if it's happening a lot, where we then apply our process. Because if it is happening, well, there's a chance, or it's indicative that it may not actually be real voters, that might actually be fraud. And what does that lead to? Everybody say it with me. Affidavits and death certificates. Right. Will I post data publicly so everyone else can evaluate? Yes, but with the limit. The raw data we got from the state, we're not allowed to just dump that out, but anybody that gets through, basically, that gets pretty far down the affidavit team, yeah, all of that will be released, along with any affirmative deaths, deceased voters that we find. So yeah, once we get them through our pipeline, we're more than happy to release it. Honestly, I'd love to release the state data. I'd love to release the data that the vendor gave back to us with all this stuff enhanced. Unfortunately, the agreements I had to sign to get them prevent us from doing that directly. However, as we work them through our process, through these funnels, we'll definitely be making everything public, as well as counts. We've made counts so far already for 2 states. I think maybe tonight Nevada will get back to us, and then we'll have the other 3 states. We'd like to report at least the top line numbers as quickly as possible. What would the first milestone be? It depends on how you count. I would think in some cases it just would be reporting those top line numbers to start to raise pressure for additional investigations, potentially by legislative bodies or other organizations. Affidavits would certainly be an important milestone, and anybody we affirm as being dead and having cast a ballot. So I think those would be definite milestones, but they come to us when they can, and we're doing our best. And the reality is we may not find any of those things, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Let's see. How many dead people and change of address people request to mail in ballot in the states? I've reported those numbers on my Twitter feed and on the updates to the Give, Send, Go, and I think a few other places. So just keep up there, and those numbers will be reported. A lot of the questions about voting machines being hacked, that's going to have to be an investigation done by, if we get expertise in that area, we'd love to fund it and get it going. But right now, our focus is very specific. And it's not an area I know too terribly much about. What's the best way to reach me? Matt@Braynard.com. You can also DM me on Twitter, but that's email would be better because it makes it easier for me to read it. Question: you can explain what we're doing. Explain as if I'm a 5-year-old. Well, I think we've done that the best we can in this video. Show what results you've achieved. Where's the money going? Every receipt, every invoice I pay is going out the door. I'll talk briefly about the money situation. The money's been released from Give, Send, Go to Stripe. Stripe is indicating I'm not getting any of the money until I think next Monday. In the meantime, I've found a few major donors who've been willing to give, I shouldn't call them donors, but major loaners who've been willing to front a little bit of money to help cover things that, because the data in the call centers, they're very reluctant to front me because, there's a lot of money at stake. But pretty much everything's going to pay for data and call centers outreach, text messaging. And most of the people working around here, working for very little or free, are just trying to pick up some expenses. And I'm actually getting of the money raised through the Give, Send, Go, not a penny. So, but everything will be accounted for. I've already posted one invoice for the raw data of $60K, and I've got an invoice to post from at least the calls that are happening tonight in Georgia and Pennsylvania. I think they started around 4 p.m. Eastern today, for I think around 50 grand. Expect another invoice tomorrow for the data enhancements. I'm guessing it's going to probably be another 30 to 50 grand, maybe less. We'll see. See any other questions here? What are the circumstances needed to sign an affidavit? I think I've already covered that. Dead voters, are you finding them in clusters or spread out? We're still evaluating that. That is a good point. Will we report our findings and homework regardless of whether it leads to fraud or not? I think I'm gonna, I don't see a whole lot of other questions that aren't already answered by the process. I'm gonna answer that. Is that, as somebody not satisfied with the outcome of this election, I think it's important that if it turns out that there actually was not widespread organized vote fraud that affected the outcome of the election, if we find that that's very unlikely, or I don't think we could definitively prove it, but demonstrate it's unlikely, it's very important that we report that as such, because if that is the case, then it's very important that those on the right recognize why this election was lost and what can be done differently in the future, particularly in terms of organizing, community organizing among the neglected constituent of the rural and blue-collar voters or Americans. So we can talk more about that subsequently, but we absolutely will report if we find nothing, or we find little to nothing. We're going to report everything we find. There's a, you know, if we do find stuff of substance, trust me, we're going to bring it forward. But if all of this results in, you know, essentially nothing, then we'll report that as well. And I think it's important. It's important that this, whether you're a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter, I think it's important that the investigation we're doing right now happens. Because if you're a Biden supporter and you believe that nothing illegal or illegitimate happened, then it's very important that people like me come forward and do this investigation and say, you know what, looks like you're right. Because the uninvestigated suspicion of voter fraud is toxic to this democracy. So I would encourage everybody to support this however they can, because this is important work, and it's not just important because Trump lost, and it's not just a vindictive search by partisans. This is about establishing the legitimacy of the election in the world's one remaining superpower, in our home country, the United States of America. And that's what's really motivating me to get through it and motivating my team to get through it. We're not here eager to just undermine the Biden administration any way we can. We're trying to establish whether or not something very dangerous happened. And not only is it dangerous if it happened, but the idea of it happening is also incredibly dangerous to this country. So just going through my list here. So on that, I do want to say we are probably going to have spent the $250,000 by Wednesday. When I initially started this, I sort of estimated the data cost would be like around $100K, and it looks like that's probably what it's going to come in as accurately, you know, once you consider all the enhancements. But the call center operation and following up with all the work that needs to be done, that's just going to continue to blow up the cost. If you look at the chart, I'm not going to switch back to it, but the low and active voter, I actually have that marked as lower priority because that's the very expensive part of this process, and we're prioritizing other things. But if we were to do this comprehensively, we're probably going to need significantly larger sums. And you know, as the money is spent and as I get estimates back from the vendors, I'll certainly post those, and we'll go as long as we can afford to. I want to note those that anybody does intend or is able to make a substantial donation, 10, 50, you know, something more, 100 or more. I prefer that we get that wired so we don't have to pay 3% to Stripe. Stripe's great, but you know, I'd rather try to avoid that. So please reach out to me directly if you're interested in doing that. I also want to thank the one individual who stepped forward at the beginning and through not knowing me from Adam, paid the $60,000 invoice to get us the source data. That was rather heroic. I'm not going to say his name. He indicated to me that if his wife found out, he would be in big trouble. But you know who you are, and I greatly appreciate it. I also greatly appreciate the other individuals who say that they're sending some money to help cover essentially as a loan until Stripe releases. Very grateful to that, and I'm very grateful to everybody. You know, whether if all you could give was $5 and $10 or $50, my heart goes out to you because that's what's making the difference. All of those in aggregate will help fund this program and help us discover, hopefully, the truth of what happened in the general election. So on that note, I'm going to ask my buddy Vito here if I missed anything.
I think you covered most of what needed to be covered.
Most? You mean there's other things I need? Oh, I covered everything I needed to cover. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. All right. Thanks for sitting through this video that went a lot longer. Maybe it's maybe the next day or two as I get a little bit more time. Perhaps we'll do like a live stream and people can ask questions there. But hopefully I covered everything here. Below this should be the link to contribute. And again, if it's a big donation, we certainly need those. Reach out direct so we can avoid those fees and also avoid the long waits before, what is it, the 16th is when Stripe said the money's going to be released. So I don't know. Keep dancing for my vendors in the meantime, but certainly need your help. Certainly appreciate everything you've done for us so far. And God bless.